I want to welcome my co-founder, Wayne Sutton, to the stage, as well as Gina Alea, Sunday Parker, Morgan Gore, and Leah Garvin. Please welcome them.
Okay, I'm gonna figure it out. There we go. All right, okay, there we go. All right, awesome. Hey, good morning. It's still morning. How's everyone doing? All right, it's cool. Well, I am really, really excited about this panel, building inclusive products. As someone who started off as a graphic designer, then got into IT, and then started doing a little bit of coding development, this is a fun, hopefully a fun conversation. Going to be a fun conversation. So, if each of the panelists can do a brief introduction, talking about who they work for and what they do and how awesome they are.
Awesome. I'll start. My name is Morgan Gore. I'm a product design manager at Yelp, working on the marketplaces team. And my focus is on building diverse teams, growing teams, and all things process.
Hi, good morning. My name is Sunday Parker. I'm an accessibility evangelist at Salesforce, and I work primarily on training and outreach within our technology and product team.
Hi, everyone. I'm Leah Garvin. I am a diversity and inclusion program manager on Google's AR/VR team. And I was so excited to hear in the keynote talking about the importance of having diversity and inclusion within tech. That's where I said I don't sit within HR, but I sit within the business, focusing on diversity and inclusion, programming across hiring, retention, culture, and product inclusion.
Hi, everybody. I'm Gina Alea. I am the Director of Internal Products and Services for Pivotal Software. And my focus is on practice management for product management and product design.
Awesome, awesome. Let's give our panelists a round of applause, please. Awesome. I'd like to talk briefly about how much of your role has changed in the past couple of years. I've been on one spectrum of diversity and inclusion conversation. You all have been on another spectrum. But I'm interested, has your roles changed toward more of around a focus on inclusion and inclusion at product level in the past 2 years, 2 or 3 years, or has it always been a focus, always been there for you all?
Yeah, I'll talk specifically about a new focus for myself in the hiring process. 2 roles ago, and primarily my last role, I realized being on a couple of hiring teams for product marketing and engineering that we had some major opportunities and areas to fix within the recruitment and the hiring process in general. So in the past couple of years, my roles have primarily shifted to focus on improvements there.
Awesome.
So I recently transitioned over from, I've been with Salesforce a little over 2 years, and I started in technical support, and I recently transitioned over to on the product side. And the reason I was able to do that is actually because we've made a huge investment in our own accessibility team at Salesforce, and we've nearly doubled as a team just in the past few months. And over the past 2 years, a huge shift in focusing on accessibility. We're a pretty large company, so of course we do have a dedicated team of folks that specifically work on accessibility engineers as well as accessibility specialists. So definitely a huge drive for focusing on accessibility.
Awesome.
Yeah, my role is relatively new at Google, having dedicated diversity inclusion program managers within different product areas. So having the tech funding dedicated headcount to that is really showing the importance that they're placing on this work, having that being outside of HR. Prior to that, I worked as a UX program manager, also on the AR/VR team. So I worked more on the kind of team inclusion side, but now I get to work a lot more on the product inclusion.
Echoing what the other panelists have said, I think 2 years ago we knew that there were big opportunities to build more inclusive teams, but what I've seen over the past 2 years is that conversation has really surfaced up in the org levels. It's a thing that we talk about explicitly in terms of hiring and how we're building out teams, and it's also something that teams are actually demanding. So as we open up recs, folks want to know, hey, how are we going to build out a more inclusive org? Who are we looking at? How's that affecting the process?
Awesome, awesome. And often when we have these conversations around inclusion and diversity, people generally think around gender and race. How how have you done work in terms of help people go beyond that? I know you talked a little bit about accessibility, but like in terms of your roles, in terms of building inclusive products and working with teams, you know, what would be some of your strategies or tactics to say, hey, we need to think beyond what we see or beyond other people's experiences?
I'll take this first. So I think the major shift that I've tried to implement and have encouraged on a lot of the teams that I've grown has been the focus on like jobs to be done and outcomes over personas. So I think personas and building for them were by definition cutting out large groups of people that we actually need to be designing for. So that's one thing that we've been doing and focusing on. We're in the business of user-centered design, and we need to make design accessible for all users.
Nice. Yeah.
Yeah, so gender and race, of course, is incredibly important when we're talking about building inclusive products. And the most prominent thing I think of is, I don't know if anyone has seen it, but there was a piece of technology developed that was a soap dispenser. And when a white person would put their hand under the soap dispenser, soap would come out. A black or brown person would put their hand under, and no soap would come out. And that is incredibly harmful, to not be able to use a product just because of the color of your skin. So of course, gender and race are incredibly important. So if we look to expanding that to including people with disabilities as well, a lot of that comes down to building accessible products that aren't discriminating in the way that you design or code. So one way that I like to remind folks is that people with disabilities are the largest minority, with 1 in 5 people having a disability. So these are your users, whether you can see it or not. And it's incredibly important not to just leave out a huge segment of those users.
Yeah, I would echo what both panelists said. I think focusing on the design side, on user scenarios and kind of tasks that different groups of people can complete as opposed to personas really helps us think more broadly. Like, are there scenarios where we want to use different ranges of devices, not only leaning on high-end devices, but leaning on the full spectrum so that we kind of have more inclusiveness around socioeconomic levels. Accessibility, Google has a strong focus on accessibility in the design process. It's been built into the material design guidelines so that it's on the forefront of people's minds around how can everybody experience these products. So those are 2 more areas, I'd say.
Yeah, I think, again, just echoing what the other panelists have said.
Let's start that side.
Yeah. No, it's okay. Being outcome-oriented is incredibly important, because if you're talking about being outcome-oriented, you're talking about folks who are trying to complete a task, irrespective of what demographic they might be coming from. I think the how of that is talking about what the product team or org's goals are around growth and scaling. And if you want to talk about growth and scaling, you inherently have to talk about inclusivity, because you're going beyond the demographic or the group that you originally started off with the product.
Yeah, no, that's a great segue, because we're talking about in terms of the how. I hope everyone in this room knows, but the data is all out there from McKinsey and a whole bunch of organizations around the business case for diversity and inclusion. We all should know that by now. But I feel like it's a new dialogue, and I could be wrong, around building inclusive teams and the data around the value of that, and building inclusive products as well. So have you had a hard time, pitching to the engineering team or executives around, we need to focus on inclusion on a product level? I love what you were talking about personas earlier. Like, we need to do more persona testing. Have you had a lot of dialogue around that to executives and the engineering teams, and has there been any pushback? Have you had to persuade them, or is this what has that been like?
Yeah, at the senior leadership level, I think that's been the dialogue for the last year, which is we have all the data that says that more diverse teams create better products, create better businesses. I'm not sure we all believe that in the gut yet, so I think we're definitely in a point where that idea is still being socialized within our ecosystem, especially within tech. I think the how of it, too, is thinking about your tools and the tools that and I'm going to use the term tools broadly, your team uses to actually come up with ideas, come up with problems come up with ideas, come up with solutions, et cetera, and how to democratize those tools and make them more inclusive so that the process is more inclusive from the get-go. If you're having to retrospectively solve after you already have a problem, it becomes a lot harder.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think the question itself that you asked has an important point in there, that diverse teams yield diverse products that are inclusive. And I think I try to bridge that gap first and foremost, that hiring is not different than product inclusion. Like, it's the fundamental piece to ensuring that we have people from different backgrounds, perspectives that can question our assumptions and challenge things and really be strategic drivers, not just research participants, but driving the strategy to how we want to design products. And so I try to frame the work that we do around hiring, recruiting as people, the business case for diversity can feel abstract, but it shows up in our products. And then showing engineers and leadership examples of both kind of product inclusion fails and disasters, and also wins and hero cases, so that people can see, the opportunity there, not just all the things that can go wrong, which are horrible, but that we can actually really be innovating for everyone and driving there if we have. If we're building more inclusively. And then, as she said, really digging into the how. Like, all of this is great. I understand what and why, but what tools do we have? When can we do this? What are the exact intervention points, from user research to internal testing to whatever it might be, so that as people are getting comfortable with it, giving them more information and spelling more of it out, so that it kind of becomes a practice that everyone can follow without the need for someone, like in my roles, continual intervention, making sure that it's actually happening.
Yeah, to echo what was said, we really push for accessibility to be thought about in the beginning of the design process. And that's because it is a lot easier to implement accessibility from the start versus retroactively going in and fixing issues after the design has already been finalized or the code has been written. So just sharing that with the design and engineering teams, that it's going to be a lot easier to implement this from the start. Specifically at Salesforce, and I'm sure a lot of other companies have this, we have a core value of equality as a company, and the way that I drive this within our leadership executive teams as well as our engineers is that equality, when it comes to products, is about making sure that we're not discriminating against users, whether they're using a screen reader or have low vision and are able to use our product equally. And the most tangible way that we can embed equality is by developing accessible products. So that's certainly one selling point, as well as when you design with accessibility in mind, often you're creating a product that is more usable by everyone.
Yeah, I think it's great when companies make it a core value and coming from the top down, that we need to be designing for accessibility earlier in the process, because not only is it less expensive to do that way, it doesn't become a trade-off at the end of the process. But going back to, I think, part of the initial question was, how do you kind of get there for teams that aren't there yet? Also, user research is a great way to build empathy for user-centric design and also designing for accessibilities. So recruiting participants from diverse backgrounds that have different levels of impairments, cognitive and physical, and making sure that those points are represented. Their experiences are felt within your teams, and you're bringing in engineering and leadership into that process. The last note I'll add to this is, you also don't have to wait for permission to do these things on your teams. So it doesn't necessarily have to come from the top down, although that's great. Just do it. Recruit diverse users and make sure that you're sharing all of these pain points with your teams.
Agreed. Thank you. I want to, I feel like we can talk for a long time. I like this. So in terms of, I'm going to jump around a little bit. It does feel like we're playing catch up. You mentioned how it's easier to do it at the beginning. When we look at like all the platforms now, we know that most of them did not think about inclusion in building their products from the beginning. You can name a lot of them, but I won't do that. And But now we have, emerging technology or technology that's not emerging, it's here now. We're talking about AR, AI, VR, everybody using machine learning to help provide better experience, to help our lives better, so to speak. What can we do now as a tech ecosystem, as a tech community to say, all right, okay, these platforms exist. It wasn't designed with inclusion in the beginning, but how can we get it right now? How can we, especially some of these new experiences, even everything like audio companies, play a role in this. So using some sort of machine learning or AI or the new experiences, how can we get it right?
I can start with that. So what I like to remind folks is that we're working mostly on a digital platform. As a person with a physical disability, I have challenges every single day just getting around because architects and designers built buildings that were not accessible decades and decades ago. And it was only until 1991 that the Americans with Disabilities Act was passed and buildings started retrofitting to be accessible. With that said, obviously, if you're talking about historical buildings, making them accessible is extremely difficult, and there's a physical component to actually building ramps and elevators. But when it comes to the digital space, often you can fix these issues without having to tear anything down, without having to reinvent the things. There are a set of web standards for accessibility that your teams can follow. So what I would really challenge every one of you who, I'm assuming whether you work on a website directly or a mobile application, you work for a company that has one. So ask that question, how have you tested your products to be accessible and inclusive?
Yeah, I love Sunday's point. I mean, I think as we move so fast in building this technology, there's kind of a perception that we can't slow down and change out what we're doing, but we can always change our approach. We can always take more time to make sure that we're testing. When we recognize that there's a problem, we can stop and fix it, test with more people, and make changes. And so I think the advice I would have, really building on Sunday's point, is to slow down. There's a tech race to I don't know what the end result is, and with all of this new technology, it feels like it's a balance between automation and computer and mindful and thoughtful and aware human intervention. I was shocked to see the HBR, or Harvard Business Review article a few months ago about finding in some cases algorithms are actually less biased than people. So there is something there when we have things being trained the right way with people that are mindful and aware. Not just anyone, but we have a lot of learning to do. But I think that in combination with the tech we're building could be the right path forward.
Yeah, I like what you both said. I think two things come to mind. The first is, if you are in tech, solve for change. Because you can change the thing, and tech is very ephemeral in a way that Sunday's example of a building is a permanent hypothesis, whereas with hardware or software, it's temporary. And so I think, to your point about slowing down to speed up, this is an arms race, and we can actually do what we need to reach these new outcomes that we have.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And initially, when teams started incorporating user research, the aversion to it was that it was going to take too much time, that it was expensive, et cetera. And how I've combated that and how other teams have done this is by operationalizing things like that, operationalize the user research process, reduce the inefficiencies that come with it, and just make sure that you're building this into part of your process. As Summer mentioned, using programs to meet accessibility guidelines, you can do this in small ways from the design, on your design teams, and you can just operationalize more things like this into your process as you grow.
Awesome. So last question, and try to have maybe some fun with it. This has been fun also, but a different way. What's your favorite product? But before that, also, what's your favorite? What tools are you using that you do your job? What's your favorite kind of tool? What's your favorite tool to do your job, and kind of what's your favorite product that you just enjoy no matter what?
Wow. Jira.
You see smile though, right? You see how like, yeah, it's like, everybody has their favorite tool. Everybody has their thing, yeah.
Teams hate Jira, designers hate Jira, but I love it. And I think that if you, whatever process you apply to a tool, if it's a project management tool like Jira or Pivotal, you can make really great things happen. But I think outside of what I use in my day-to-day, I think Medium is a great tool that's providing a lot of information in an accessible way, whether or not you are paying for a freemium model. The rate at which we can share information and new ideas is just incredible.
Awesome, yeah.
I think my favorite platform as far as learning is Twitter. I learned so much about accessibility and different ideas and point of views from Twitter. And then you said favorite product as well? Like
favorite
physical?
Yeah, it doesn't matter. What do you
Okay.
like? You like, I love this. It could be a game, it could be anything. Like this.
Well, I'll just tie it back to disability as well. I do have other hobbies, but my fundamental favorite product is my Apple Watch. And I was really afraid to live alone as a person with a physical disability. And when I got the Apple Watch with the mind of having some hands-free device, that makes me feel a lot safer, and that was never something that was thought about when they built the Apple Watch, and it's something that everyone uses for various reasons, but that will always be my favorite product.
Awesome.
I think as a program manager, kind of similar to what Morgan said, I love any tool where you can kind of track work and give people visibility in the process. And with any team that I'm on, I tailor whatever tool I use to what makes sense to them, because the process is only as good as the people that it's in service of. So yeah, now I use a lot of Google Docs and Sheets and stuff, but in the past I've used tools like Jira, other task tracking, and I think like whatever makes sense to the team works for me. As far as a personal product, I don't even know. I guess I love my Kindle reader. It's like easy to bring around, bring as many books as you want. You can start and stop things at any time. And so, yeah, I like that product a lot.
Cool.
Yeah, so my favorite work product is a manila sticky note, and by proxy real-time board, digital proxy real-time board. I like the tools that obfuscate the individual who contributed in any ideation or problem solving or prioritization process, whether that's female or male, or like it's the executive assistant or it's the CEO. When we obfuscate those power dynamics, the best things tend to rise up. And so I like sticky notes and having everybody use a Sharpie and have everybody using the same tape and so on and so forth.
That's cool. That's cool. That's awesome. Well, wanted to thank all our panelists for being here. This has been a fun conversation for me. I loved it. So thank you all. We can give panelists a round of applause, please. Yeah.